You know, the idea of the end times, it's something that has captivated people for, well, thousands of years. But what if it's not just some fuzzy abstract idea? What if there's a detailed, step-by-step timeline for how it all goes down? In this explainer, we're going to dive deep into one specific interpretation of that prophetic timeline, exploring the sequence of events it lays out.
So, where does this whole story start? It all kicks off with a promise. Picture this. Jesus' followers are on the Mount of Olives, watching him ascend into the clouds. And then, bam, two figures in white show up with this absolutely mind-blowing message. He's coming back, and the way he returns will be the exact same way he left. This promise right here is the anchor for the entire timeline we're about to walk through.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start with that promised return, then we're going to look at time itself in a totally different way. After that, we'll get into the big events this timeline predicts: the Rapture, a period called the Tribulation, the Second Coming, and finally, we'll peek into what this whole thing calls eternity.
Okay, let's jump right into part 1, a promised return. The prophecy isn't just about how Jesus will return, but also precisely where. And as you'll see, the source material points to something pretty incredible: a perfect symmetry.
And this is where things get really, really specific. The source material draws a straight line between two different parts of the Bible. On one hand, you've got the New Testament story of Jesus leaving from the Mount of Olives. And on the other, you have a prophecy from Zechariah, written centuries before, that says the Messiah's feet will stand on that very same mountain when he returns. It's like a perfect booking, right? The departure and the arrival happening in the exact same spot.
Okay, but this brings up a huge question, doesn't it? If this return was promised so long ago, what's the deal with the delay? To even start to answer that, we've got to look at time in a completely different way. You know, if you read the book of Revelation, you see this phrase over and over: I am coming quickly. But here we are, almost 2,000 years later. This seems like a major contradiction, and it's a key puzzle the source material really tries to solve. So how on earth can nearly 2,000 years be considered quick?
Well, the key, according to this interpretation, is found right here in this verse from 2 Peter, and it's a pretty wild idea that God's experience of time is nothing like ours. The thinking is that God exists outside of our linear time, so it feels like an eternity to us could be just a flash from a divine point of view.
Okay, so let's just do the math here for a second. If a day to God is like 1,000 years to us, then these past 2,000 years since the promise was made, that's just 2 days. 2 days on God's calendar. From that theological viewpoint, the return really is happening quickly.
So what's this chunk of time we're living in right now? What's it called? Well, in this framework, it's called the Church Age. This whole era is said to have kicked off at Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit first came to the believers, and it's designed to last right up until the next major event on that prophetic calendar.
And that brings us to the big picture, the prophetic calendar itself. Think of this as our roadmap for the rest of our chat. It starts with the church age that we're in now, and it lays out a very clear sequence of what's to come. So let's use this chart to go through it step by step.
All right, first stop on our timeline, the huge event that ends our current age. It's called the Rapture. Now, it's super important to get this distinction right. The Rapture isn't Jesus coming back to the earth. It's him coming for his followers. It's described as a sudden, almost blink-and-you'll-miss-it event, where all believers are taken from the world to meet Christ up in the air.
Okay, so how does this actually go down? The sequence is really specific. First, believers who've already passed away are raised up with new, glorified bodies. Then, at the same moment, those who are still alive are instantly transformed in the twinkling of an eye, as the text says. Then both groups are caught up together, and according to this timeline, they're taken to heaven for the next 7 years. So let's look at our timeline again and see where this fits in. You can see right there, the Rapture is the big punctuation mark that ends the church age. And look what kicks off on earth right after that, a 7-year period that's known as the Tribulation.
So, according to this view, the church is now in heaven. So what's happening back on earth? Well, that's where the story takes a dramatic turn.
And this isn't some vague, undefined period. The source is very clear. It's 7 years of tribulation on earth. Theologically, this 7-year window is often linked back to a really specific prophecy in the Old Testament, sometimes called Daniel's 70th week.
So looking at our map, how does this 7-year tribulation wrap up? It culminates in a massive final conflict, the Battle of Armageddon. And it's right at this peak moment that we have the second coming. And this is totally different from the rapture. This isn't secret. This is a public, visible, glorious return to earth, landing, believe it or not, right back on the Mount of Olives. It brings the whole thing full circle.
But wait, the story is not over yet, not by a long shot. According to the source, the second coming is what kicks off the final chapters of history and leads to a whole new reality.
So what happens next? There are 3 huge final stages. First up, a 1,000-year reign of peace on earth, often called the millennium. After that comes the final judgment of every soul, known as the Great White Throne Judgment. And that, finally, leads to the ultimate destination, a brand new heaven and a new earth, which is the start of the eternal state.
So let's pull back and look at the whole timeline one last time. Wow! We've gone all the way from the church age we're in now, through the rapture, the tribulation, the second coming, the millennium, and the final judgment. It's an incredibly detailed roadmap that in this view lays out the path from this very moment all the way into forever.
But you know what's really interesting? This whole detailed map of the end, it's not really presented as an ending at all. It's actually a transition, a doorway to a new beginning. And when you think about a timeline that stretches for thousands of years, all leading to this state of eternity, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the whole point of time in the first place?